Your YouTube feed is crap. Stop wasting your time watching bot-boosted shills and self-appointed gurus cloying for your attention. Instead, join the Gosslings interview, live stream, and podcast. The Gosslings, a dark-lit digital speakeasy of free thinkers. A super chat of radical truth-seeking wizards who eat trolls for second breakfast. Topics that'll make your mama's hair stand on end. Ideas that'll make your pastor's knees knock. Guests that will illuminate the hidden chambers of your mind. And interviews that strike down the darkness. Welcome to the Gosslings.
Man, I guess that notification bell actually works for a change.
Yeah, hey, if you're watching this right now, your notification bell is working.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, all you wonderful warriors of the broken sword. I am Jonathan.
I'm Nick.
And we are the Gosslings. And we are doing another midweek stream where we interview an amazing person that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a great time. But before we get into that, let's burn through our obligatories real quick.
Yeah, let's do it. If you're watching this and you've never seen this before and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to get more, hit the subscribe button. We'd really appreciate that. And while you're joining us, for those of you who have subscribed and you know the way of the broken sword, go ahead and grab your drinking vessel.
Yes.
And we'll do our toast.
You want me to lead this time?
Yeah, you go ahead.
All right. Here we go. Take up the broken sword of your father.
And strike down the darkness.
Amen. All right. Say, Nick, what are these cool mugs we're drinking from?
Oh, great question. Well, let's talk about these mugs, these amazing mugs. These are the Kothon Spartan mugs, handcrafted by Joel Cherico from Cherico Pottery. Everyone is handcrafted, hand-painted. Joel made these to be replicas of the actual Kothon that the Spartans would carry. He designed these in collaboration with the great Stephen Pressfield, author of Gates of Fire. You've got to drink like a man, drink like a Spartan. Go to ChericoPottery.com and check them out.
Absolutely.
And tell us about that lush mane you got going on there.
Watch out, Gerard Butler. Speaking of, Giordani Jovanovic hair and skincare products made by real men for real men. As I like to say, be as sexy as you are deadly. Give 007 a run for his money. Awaken your inner John Wick. Or, as Nick likes to say,
give your better half, men, a reason to doubt that.
JordaniJovanovic.com. Hair and skincare products, everything from shampoos to hair serums, lotions, beard balms, beard oils, and pomades. Great guy. Mike Fisher is the owner of the company, and he's a supporter of the channel. And great man, Christian friend. Small business, ran out of his house with his wife in Arizona, and they are fantastic. You can see all their products behind us, and you can see the fruits of their labor on my face. So there you go. JordaniJovanovic.com.
All right, we've got a special treat for you guys tonight. This is a midweek live stream. This is not a pre-recorded interview.
The old school, baby.
We have the great S. Douglas Woodward with us, author of Rebooting the Bible. And without further ado, let's welcome Doug Woodward.
Hi, gentlemen. How are you?
We're doing so great, man. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited about it. You guys are a lot of fun, and it's I've been looking forward to it. So thanks.
You know, every time I listen to an interview that you do, it stretches my understanding. It stretches my brain. Hurts my brain a little bit, I'll be honest. But as a layman Bible scholar, I'm always fascinated at your take because it's always so well researched, and it's a little different than what we typically hear from a lot of our guests.
Yeah. I tend to get bored with the sort of the standard old school view of whether it's a prophetic scenario or just about anything in terms of biblical. I'm a stickler for the main the main teachings of our faith, but when it comes to some of the issues such as prophecy, then I definitely tend to stretch people's thinking about what's up with that.
Yeah. Is your interest in prophecy what led you to eventually write Rebooting the Bible?
No, actually it wasn't. It was, I had written, I've written like 20 books. And so I had probably written 14 books before I did Rebooting the Bible. Rebooting the Bible came about as a result of stumbling over a website, a guy named Barry Setterfield, if you're familiar with Barry. He and I have become friends. He's a physicist, an astrophysicist, and he had written extensively, not just on scientific matters like zero-point energy, but he had written quite a bit on the conspiracy of the rabbis in the first century to dilute and basically destroy a lot of the Messianic prophecies of the Old Testament, because they told the story about Jesus just really well, and they didn't want that to be out there. Too many Christian evangelists were stealing Jews out of the synagogue, and so they had to put an end to it. So they decided to change the Bible, and that sounds shocking, and I know I do shock people with that, but so I discovered that, and then I also discovered the chronology issue. The chronology, I'd always been troubled. I've always kind of vacillated about, do I believe in a 6,000-year-old Earth, or do I believe in an old Earth? I've tended to become more of an old Earth guy than the 6,000-year guy, although Barry Setterfield's work is causing me to rethink that. But his work on the chronology and the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament that was translated by scholars, Hebrew and Greek scholars in Alexandria, Egypt, about 300 years before Jesus began to teach. The Septuagint has a very different chronology that just so happens to align with the chronology of Egypt and the chronology of Sumer and Babylon, of China, and so forth. And so I really began to dig into that, and I thought, this might be the answer, because I was very dissatisfied with the fact that the traditional biblical chronology, having the flood at 2350 BC, and the compression with Nimrod about 100 years later, and Abraham about another 150 years later, and it was all compressed, and that just didn't make sense to me. And so anyway, looking at the chronology, that really got me excited. So I began to study that, and pretty soon it just kind of, my mind, I got a picture of what I needed to do, and so I have written, I guess, about 800 pages in 2 volumes, and maybe more than that, but I'm really dealing with those issues. And volume 1, I'm dealing with the conspiracy, the rabbinical conspiracy to change the Messianic prophecies and the chronology of the Old Testament. And in volume 2, I'm dealing with, once you understand the correct chronology, how does it alter the way we understand the stories of Genesis 1 through 11? And the reality is it changes them a great deal. Particularly, it changes the things that we've come to believe about the Tower of Babel, the flood, Nimrod, and so forth. Once you understand the chronology, a lot of the stuff that we typically believe turns out to be impossible. And so those things are really what I try to drill into in the 2nd volume of Rebooting the Bible.
Now, so those changes that make the chronologies impossible to believe, do you think those were intentional changes by the rabbis after Jesus ascended, after the destruction of the temple?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was partly the book of Jubilees, which was written before Jesus was born, not long, but before. And it kind of began the process of altering the lunar calendar and attempting to realign the history of the Hebrew people to align it to every 50 years. Key events happened every 50 years. And so there were already changes that were being made there. And the book of Jubilees was kind of the catalyst for that. But what really was the catalyst was the school that was assembled in a little village outside of what today is Tel Aviv, a little village called Javne, or the Anglicism is the Angloism or Anglicism is Jamnia, and so a school was formed there, and it so happens very few people realize that the rabbis were actually the Pharisees, that the Pharisees were the ones that escaped the destruction of the temple, and they were allowed by Titus himself to restore their Jewish religion. However, they made a very significant change, and that no longer was the Old Testament their authority. They began to use as their authority what today we know as the Mishnah and the Talmud, which was written from that, which was the concept of the oral law, and having that written down, and it became authoritative to the rabbis, and the rabbis themselves claimed that they had authority to contradict and correct Moses even. And so that really was the rabbinical revolution of the first and mostly second century AD. And so anyway, I kind of forget your question, but that's what happened.
Yeah, but isn't that where we also get the Masoretic text?
The Masoretic text comes from that. Again, you've got different textual families. It's kind of complex, and I go through it in the book and in a DVD I've also done on it called the Septuagint Controversy. It is difficult. It's complex, but yes, ultimately the text that is created by, I say it's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva and his team developed from one textual family of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew. They created a new Hebrew Old Testament, and in that Old Testament, they changed the wording of Messianic prophecies, and we can talk about what those changes were in a second, but they also changed the chronology, and they did that clearly to try to invalidate the candidacy of Jesus of Nazareth to be the Messiah. And many church fathers, beginning with Eusebius and others, Justin Martyr in particular, complained about the fact that the rabbis had changed the prophecies, and so it became a real problem. So ultimately, it becomes the Masoretic text over the next, let's say, 400 years. It is really is taken into the kind of the care of the Masoretes, and that's where we get Masoretic texts from. And the Jews are in Babylon, and they create the Talmud, and the Talmud, the Mishnah, and the Rabbi Akiva Bible become their holy books. It's a little bit like Mormonism or other religions, cults that have multiple books beside the Bible. Mm-hmm. The rabbis, in effect, had multiple books. And so by the beginning of the 6th century, the Masoretes take over the care of the Old Testament, and then it grows into the Masoretic text, and how we actually get to it and how it was published and so forth. I actually have another book called A Biography of the Christian Bible, which really goes into some of those issues as well. So Christians don't understand much about where we get our Bible, and so I'm attempting to provide a bit more literacy about our holy book and why we can rely upon it.
Well, let me ask you a question. If so, and this is something that I would never ask, anyone in my church, in the church hierarchy that I go to.
Sounds like a question I'd like to answer. Go for it.
Yeah, this is our time. This is, we're a dark lit digital speakeasy of,
yes, that's right.
People who ask these questions. Knowing that the Septuagint is probably the actual text that Jesus would have quoted from. knowing
correct. That's
knowing
correct.
that it was coming from a pure translation source and not the Masoretic text.
Right.
Why do modern denominations, modern translations of the Bible rely so much on the Masoretic text for the Old Testament? Why do they do that? Why don't they just use the Septuagint?
Well, it depends whether you're Catholic or Protestant. If you're Catholic, you rely upon the Akiba version because a guy named Jerome translated the Hebrew Bible of Akiba into the Latin Vulgate. So it became the Latin Bible. And unfortunately, he basically utilized, for the most part, he utilized the Hebrew. And he and Augustine had a fight basically over the Septuagint. Augustine encouraged him almost with tears to use the Septuagint to create the Latin version, and he refused to do it, probably because of ego. He had learned Hebrew. He had moved back to Jerusalem. He learned Hebrew, and he decided to write the Hebrew Bible based upon his own, or Latin Bible based upon his understanding of the Hebrew. And so that's the reason that the Catholic Bible is based upon what we would say today is the Masoretic text. And then the Protestants have a different story, and it's because of the Reformation. The Reformation, you put as the primary authority the written scripture. And Calvin and Luther believed that if scripture were to be our guide, who better than the Jews could we go to get the word correctly? And so, not realizing, apparently, the problems that existed by probably not being familiar with the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament, they basically emphasize what became is known as the Masoretic text. And so it has been the Protestant Bible ever since the 16th century. And so, the idea of going and using the Greek Bible that was translated from the most authentic version of the Hebrew that had been compiled around 400 BC by Ezra. It was only about 120 years later that was translated into Greek by the folks in Alexandria. And so you had a very, very small gap there between, the text that Ezra had put together. Basically, a first generation copy went to Alexandria, and that was what was used as the basis for creating the Greek translation. And you're right, earlier, Jonathan, between 80 and 90% of the quotations, and there's literally hundreds of quotations, as you would know, in the New Testament about the Old Testament, those are from the Septuagint. And there's lots of debate about, the more fundamentalists amongst us that want to disagree with that. But the scholars that I read, and I read quite a few of them, as you might imagine, they essentially line up with that assertion. So the Septuagint was the Bible of the early church. The Vulgate came along, and by the 6th century, it began to be the Bible that was used in the Western Roman Church. In the Eastern Roman Church, which we know as the Orthodox Church, they never stopped using the Septuagint. That was their Bible, and it has been their Bible ever since. Now, there are certain issues we could get into about Origin and things that happened that Origin did in the 3rd century, which is another story, pretty complex, and maybe we don't want to go there, but I talk about it in detail in the book. But nevertheless, the Septuagint is the Bible of the Orthodox Church. And my view is that Luther and Calvin, they didn't want to use the Latin Vulgate, and they did not want to use the Greek Septuagint because it was the Roman Church. And they were obviously trying to revolutionize the nature of Christianity.
So you're saying I'm safe at an Orthodox church?
Yeah, I think you're safe.
Nice.
We can talk about the icons and whether or not that's idolatry.
Dude, that's why I'm going. Are you kidding me?
He just likes the beards.
I want the beards and the
pictures.
pageantry.
Oh yeah. Well, and the pictures are really neat. I mean, those tiles and those stained glass windows.
They are
really
beautiful.
Cool. They are beautiful, and I'm an art lover, so I do enjoy that. Yeah.
It really blew my mind. I listened to a podcast with you recently, and you made that same statement that Ezra, they come out of the Babylonian captivity.
Right.
They build they rebuild the temple.
Right.
Ezra, they write out the Bible again. They write out the Old Testament, and it's only 120 years later,
Right.
that the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, comes along. I didn't realize it was that such a short span of time. It's like, how is it, knowing that now? I think it's so sad that now we know that now, but our denominations are just so locked up in their traditions, that they would never.
It's really true. Yeah, just to kind of emphasize that point again, the the time lapse from the time of Ezra's creation of the authentic Hebrew text, 400 BC, to be 500 years before that was in effect turned into the Proto-Masoretic text that later becomes the Masoretic text. So there you have a gap of 500 years. And not only that, you get in and you look at the three codices that have complete Bibles, almost complete Bibles, Old Testament and New Testament, Sinaiticus, Leningradus, and Vaticanus. These codices means books, essentially. So they had kind of gotten away from the scrolls. And now they were using, books, pretty awkward kinds of books, but books nonetheless.
Found
parchment. And lo and behold, we have those from the 3rd and 4th centuries. And I actually noticed literally today, I'll make the point, then I'll come back to it. But the Old Testament Hebrew Bible, there are two primary codices that exist, that were used in the creation of the Biblia Hebraica, and they were from the 9th and 10th centuries AD, and so there you even had a gap from Akiba to the version of the Masoretic text used in the creation and the publishing of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, of almost 1,000 years.
Wow.
And about 14 or 1,300 years going back to Ezra. And so Christians truly have a treasure that they don't realize, that we have so much more reason to believe in the book because of how close to the original writing of the compilation of the Bible. I happen to believe that Moses wrote sections, and so did Isaiah wrote Isaiah, and Ezekiel wrote Ezekiel, and so on. But Ezra was the one who compiled it. Obviously, he wrote Ezra. He may have written Nehemiah as well. But you have all of that comes together in that period of time. And tradition says that 3 copies were kept in the temple. And so perhaps one, or a first generation copy of that compilation, that Bible, was taken to Alexandria. And so, cool. It's pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, that's cool. Man. So I want to get back to some of the changes that you mentioned, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You mentioned that there were some changes from the Septuagint that those rabbis made about some of the prophecies, the Messianic prophecies,
right,
to steer people away from Christ. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Quoting them, I don't have all the stuff in front of me, but let me just explain. There were 3 categories of things that they were changing, and this becomes pretty obvious in certain passages in the New Testament where you read them, and clearly that isn't the wording that's in the Masoretic text. But the changes were being made for 3 reasons. One is they wanted to change the nature of the Messiah. The Messianic prophecies, such as the one that talks about Bethlehem and one is coming from of old and so forth, from ancient times or from eternity, it appears in those passages that the Messiah is divine and that he is perhaps God and so forth. So one of the things is to make changes in the text that minimize the interpretation that the Messiah would be divine and would be God. All right, so that's one. Second thing is changes in the message of the Messiah, and that really is salvation by grace, salvation by trusting in his name. And there are several passages that talk about trusting in God's name that are changed to where it's reinforced about believing in the law. And so those are changed. And then the third thing, which I think is really in some ways the most important, is the nature of the mission of the Messiah. The mission of the Messiah, and I kind of get goosebumps when I say this, but it was to bring the Gentiles into the people of God. And the changes that were made in that regard are pathetic. I'll say it that way.
Nice.
They're really pathetic.
Sure.
The Messiah was coming to bring the Gentiles into the people of God. Now, we can talk about how that happens, whether the covenant theology guys or the dispensational theology guys or this new thing called Commonwealth theology, exactly how, the Christians and the Jews are brought together. But that the Messiah that was his goal, was to bring a unity between the people that were not with God and the people of God, and he was to bring them together. And that was attacked very much by the rabbis that had been the Pharisees, obviously Jesus's enemies, 50 or 60 years before they tortured some of the Old Testament passages.
Wow. So you're saying, and I'm just, I'm learning, I'm wrapping my head around this, but
That's good.
when I'm thinking about like the Sanhedrin, the scribes, the Pharisees, and so forth of Jesus's day.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that because they had essentially the Septuagint available as they were using primarily, I'm sure, or excerpts from it at least, they knew those passages that the Messiah would be God? Did they have that understanding? Because I always thought growing up that like they knew that the Messiah was going to come, he'd be a conquering king, he was going to deliver them from the Romans, they thought, but
Right,
I never heard that they thought
What
he
if
was
the
going to
Romans
be
ever done?
like
No,
God or God's son.
Yeah, let me try to I would say correct that a little bit. What they were doing was, well, first off, I think that they didn't believe that the Messiah was going to be a divine character.
Okay.
But they heard these guys out there like James and John and Paul and all these guys talking about the Messiah as equal with God, as the Son of God, as God in the flesh. They didn't believe that. They didn't believe their God could come in the flesh. And so they didn't interpret those passages, but they wanted to make really sure that nobody else got confused. And so they altered some of those passages as well. Okay. So in my view, they were forcing their interpretation upon those verses. And so, no, I don't necessarily think they believed that the Messiah was going to be divine, although it's really hard when you're thinking of the late Michael Heiser and some of his teachings. But, when you understand that there was clearly two persons in the Godhead, let alone the Spirit, in the Old Testament, it's really hard to understand how they could not understand or could not see that the Messiah was going to be divine. So, but anyway.
Wow, man. Wow. That's deep stuff.
Yeah.
For me, that's really deep stuff.
It's funny. Right before you mentioned Commonwealth theology in the chat, one of our buddies, Cactus Kicker, said they changed it so that Charles III would be born in Buckingham stables.
Well said, Cactus. Well said.
Yes. Well, okay. I'm not sure which end of the horse he was, but anyway.
Whichever one had the best teeth.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you get here on the Gosslings, folks.
There you go. Yeah,
we're going to tip your waitress.
Nothing is sacred here except the Lord.
That's right.
Amen.
So, I mean, in all honesty, speaking of which, listening to this, and we've listened to you talk about this before, but in our conversation here tonight, what are some of the most salient effects that are a result of the changes that have been made that affect a Christian's life in regards to, reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, going through their day-to-day life? What are some things that that people should be warned about in adherence to these changes?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, well, I think first off, if you believe, as I do, that the chronology of the Septuagint was the chronology of the early church, and that it is, of course, I take real pains to show that even, there were several historians long before the life of Christ that said the same things in terms of the age of the world. And they were saying the same thing, that it was basically 5,500 years from the time of the creation until the time of the Messiah. It wasn't 4,000 years, right? And so that was a major aspect of what they were saying. And so if you understand that that means that the flood didn't occur in like 2350, but it occurred in like 3350, which is really what the chronology says, then all of a sudden the history of Samaria and India and North Africa, all that begins to fit, because that's when those civilizations started. They started in around 3100 BC, 3000 BC, 2900 BC. And so, the idea that the world had to get kind of restarted again around 3300 BC makes sense in terms of its alignment with these other chronologies that academics rely upon. They don't rely upon the Bible's chronology, because clearly, this flood happened at 2350 BC. It doesn't make any sense. There was a flood, but it couldn't have been then. And so you've got an apologetic value. So once you understand that you don't have to believe in the Bishop Ussher King James Version chronology, which is clearly wrong. You don't have to believe in that, but you can believe in a chronology that was actually the authentic chronology that really coincides with the Egyptian chronology. And I'm saying it coincides plus or minus 100 years. But we're not talking about plus or minus 1,000 years. Right. And so, so it is a big difference. And so you've got the apologetic value. That's one thing. The second thing, recognizing that the reason that there are differences in the Old Testament wording and the New Testament wording, which can cause you to kind of get your head, kind of all twisted around, worried about why are those wording. I thought all the words in the scripture were right, every jot and tittle, every word, Well, I mean, the whole history of inspiration is another whole subject, but the words of the Septuagint were the words that the apostles were quoting, and Jesus quoted. Now, I happen to believe that Jesus knew all the Bible by heart, as he was involved in its writing originally. So, forgive me for being a supernaturalist, but I am. So
how dare you, Doug?
But yes, but he likely, it was true that most of the Jewish people, they didn't understand Hebrew, even in Judea. They understood some of it, kind of like the way we understand some French and some Latin, but they didn't necessarily understand it the way that the Pharisees did or the Sadducees did, and so forth. And so they spoke Greek and they spoke Aramaic, and those were their languages. And so, the concept of the apostles speaking and preaching in Greek, that's exactly what the church had to do. It had to preach the vernacular of the language of the people, and it was Greek, right? And so, it's possibly true that Matthew wrote his gospel in Hebrew because he was clearly writing his gospel for the Hebrews. If you look at all the prophecies he was quoting, clearly that was his audience. But be that as it may, so that clears up a major area of confusion. And now I like to point out, that while the King James Bible Old Testament is incorrect relative to the Messianic prophecies. It's corrected in the King James New Testament. Why? Well, because the King James New Testament is quoting the Septuagint.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
it creates the solution for that problem. All
Okay.
right? So you've got
That's
that.
good. You're healing like a major wound in mine and some of
Because I love the King
friends.
James.
We're
I
all
love
like-
the King James.
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, I was just scratching all over when I started doing all this stuff, you know. The other thing I'll say last is that the book of Jasher, bad juju. Book of Jasher, bad juju. In terms of the stories that it tells, they are way off target. If the chronology of the Septuagint is right, the book of Jasher has to be wrong. The book of Jubilees, wrong. And so the book of Enoch, probably right, at least the first 16 chapters or so. So it's important because so many of our brethren are reading these extra biblical pseudepigrapha and so forth, and they don't realize that the stories that they're reading that they just think are so cool, they're at best they're historical fiction. You know, they're it's kind of like the book Taylor Caldwell wrote about Luke, Dear and Glorious Physician. Great story. None of it's probably true, but it was a great story about Luke meeting Mary and other Mary and so forth and so on. And so that's kind of what, you know, the book of Jasher is. I happen to believe the book of Jasher was probably written in the kind of not in the Middle Ages, but probably in the 15th or 16th century, and was trying to take advantage of the fact this guy Gutenberg had made a printing press, and this was a cool book that people might want to read. You know, so I know I'm being very what's the right word, cynical
That's
by
okay.
saying that, but that's kind of what I think.
Yeah.
You came to the right.
Yeah,
parlor,
you're in
brother.
good company. I was thinking about when you're talking about the apostles quoting from the Septuagint.
Right.
I'm like, what an as a Christian, Catholic, Protestant, what have you.
Right.
What an embarrassing inconsistency it is that we defined our canon, like the New Testament canon, by was this written by an eyewitness of Christ?
Right.
That's one of the criteria.
That is one of the criteria, yes.
But we won't choose our translation on the same standard of, well, we're only going to choose translations that were quoted by the apostles.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And of course, the New Testament, we're golden, but going to the Old Testament, then that's really the question. And so that's what I'm saying, though, is that there's so little understanding of this history. But if you really want to, you know, cast aspersions, if you want to blame somebody, blame the theologians for the last 300 or 400 years in the Protestant faith. This stuff, what I've discovered, is not really what I discovered. You know, it's out there. It's been out there the whole time.
Yeah.
And you had scholars talking about these things. I quote a lot of them in the book. But they weren't popularizing this fact, and they weren't telling the people these facts. And so consequently, it probably, we don't want to disturb people. We don't want to tell them that the rabbis actually corrupted the Old Testament. Because, right. But if you say, but wait a second, they corrupted a version that they wanted to turn into their cult called Rabbinical Judaism, which is essentially a cult off of Hebrew. The Karates or the Karates are a Jewish sect that really only believes in the Old Testament, not the Talmud and so forth. So they've stayed true to the Word of God. But Rabbinical Judaism it's not biblical by any stretch. So
is this why the Dead Sea Scrolls are so important? Because the Essenes had fled to the caves.
By the way,
fled to Qumran, and they were hiding the excerpts that we got from those.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. The actual amount of documents that were Greek documents that reinforced the Septuagint, it's only about 20% of all the documents that were there. You have a lot of repetition of documents. Obviously, certain documents that they found, certain books that they found, other books that they didn't find. So, it's hard to say exactly, what we have there in terms of why it's important. But we do know that, like the book of Isaiah, that does have a few prophecies that were tweaked a bit. Some of those tweaks occurred even in Second Temple Judaism. You know, like I said, the Book of Jubilees was already beginning to try to change the history of the Jewish people. And that could have been done in the 2nd century BC, in the 1st century BC. You also had this thing called the Samaritan Pentateuch. Do you know about that?
No.
Never heard of that.
Samaritan Pentateuch. All right, remember the Samaritans, the Good Samaritan and all that.
Yeah.
Well, the Samaritans were the people that were brought in by Sennacherib and by the Assyrians to populate the land where they had taken all of the Jews, the northern kingdom, out. So that's what they would do, is they'd take, you know, the Russians did the same thing basically in the 20th century with Ukraine, is they killed off 7 million Ukrainians, and they put in Russian farmers to farm the land. And so that's another reason why the Ukrainians and the Russians don't get along so well. But essentially, this is what the Assyrians would do. And then they would disperse those people that they had conquered all over the place. All right. Now, that leads to some interesting stories and doctrines that Michael Heiser talked about, that I think have a lot of merit. But anyway, you've got that that element of it. And I'm kind of forgetting what I was going to say. But anyway, I think that the understanding that there are these books that were created that don't really consistently tell this, they don't tell the truth about what was going on. So anyway, so maybe I'll think about what it was I was going to say in a second. But anyway, let's move on. Let's
change. Let's talk about Nimrod.
I think. Well, first of all, I just want to say, I bet those karates get invited to all of the best bar mitzvahs.
It's right.
No doubt.
Oh my goodness.
I've only been sitting on that one for 3 minutes. No, but you know what? It makes sense though that the Septuagint would be the one to fall back on, because when you think about, you know, the historicity, the historical context of the time, you're post Alexander the Great. You know, even so, you're already in Greece anyways, you know, or you know, the greater Hellenic area. But even outside of that, even in Egypt, you know, like no one seems to ever remember that, like, Cleopatra is a Macedonian descendant, you know, through Ptolemy, you know, because the Ptolemaic line was, you know, Ptolemy was one of Alexander's.
Well, that's so, probably so. Yeah.
Greek all in the place. It's got to be more common of a language than we like to give it credit for. Right. Anyway,
clearly it was the language of the world at that time, except probably when you went on the other side of the Indus River. But up until that point.
Excellent segue, by the way. Speaking of one world languages.
Yes. Okay.
There it is.
Nimrod and the Tower of Babel.
Ah, okay.
You have such an interesting. It's so funny, Doug, because you are one of those guys who is, like, in a way, fringe of the fringe, you know, with your, it's like you've circled back around till you and Ryan Pitterson, like, kind of both exist in this interesting area where you exist in this world where everybody's like Jasher and Jubilees and, you know, Tower of Babel, but yet you don't have the same take that is kind of like the party line standard.
No, that's true. I don't. I mean, I enjoy reading the Book of Jasher. It's a fun story, but it's historical fiction. But anyway, having said that,
Trasher.
The Book of Trasher.
I've been sitting on that one.
Trasher, yes. Yeah, so no,
copyright 2023.
The Book of Nubiles.
So you're getting ready to ask a question, though, or make a point, so I kind of cut you off there, John.
No, not at all. I'm sorry. How dare you?
Well, I think the question was, so we have always assumed, based on, you know, conversations with a lot of our guests, and it's really good to have fresh perspectives on this, that the rebellion at Babel, when they were building the tower, was led by Nimrod.
Right. Well, we get that primarily from Josephus, who he said that was who led the rebellion. And it's ironic because Josephus's chronology coincides to a great extent with the Septuagint chronology. But there's good reason to believe that Nimrod wasn't the person that led the rebellion. And part of it's in the story itself. If you look at chapter 11 of Genesis, you don't see Nimrod's name mentioned at all.
Right.
Right. And who do you see instead of Nimrod? It's the people. It's we. And it says they did. Let us, do this. Let us build a tower to heaven. It was clearly, the statement there was making it clear that no one person was to blame. Everybody agreed. This is what we are going to do. Right. And so you couldn't blame Nimrod. Right. Now, here's the problem. If you say that the flood occurred roughly 3350, Barry Setterfield thinks it's more like 3500, but anyway, it's clearly 1,000 years or more before what Bishop Ussher and the King James Bible says. If you say that flood happened then you have to come up with, okay, well then, when would the Tower of Babel have been? How far into the future would that have been? Well, if you believe kind of in the Bishop Ussher thing, you'd sort of say, well, it's probably only about 120 years in the future. Well, then you get into all kinds of problems with how many people would it take to build a tower like that, and had the people really turned away from God that rapidly, and so forth. Now, if you postulate though that was probably 250 years, then you can have hundreds of thousands, probably several million people are already existing in the world by that point in time. All right, so you sort of say, okay, Tower of Babel probably happens roughly 3150, something like that, BC. All right, well, here's the problem. Nimrod isn't going to be born for another 200 years. So if you look at the chronology, he won't be born for another 200 years. And at least 100 years.
That's a big oversight for a historian like Josephus, it seems.
I don't. That one I can't figure out, because he clearly says that when he's writing his histories of the Jews, that he's writing. He says 5,000 years of history, but he really was just using a shortened. It was 5,500. And that's what Demetrius the chronographer said, who was a contemporary. There's a book called the World History. It's like Liber Biblicatum Antiquarum or something like that. I forget the Latin. But anyway, there were that, and there was one other source who I'm not remembering the name of. But these other chronologists had written prior to or in the same kind of time frame as the Septuagint. That's the time, that's the chronology that they were saying it happened. All right. And so it really seems like it, wasn't Nimrod. Now, what I believe is that there were, several dispersions, because there's really 3 different dispersions talked about in Genesis 10 and 11. And so you have to kind of go through and look at the verses carefully and see that. But it looks like that some of the people, perhaps interestingly, one of the sons of Canaan, whose name was Sin, S-I-N, that's the way it's at least spelled, maybe it's pronounced differently, but he appears to have left before the Tower of Babel incident. And that just happens to be the father of the Chinese race. You never hear the discussion in the news about the Anglo-Sino relations.
Oh yeah.
Sino, S-I-N-O.
Yeah.
So,
oh wow.
So there's a historical precedent right there. Yeah, and so you've got that possibility. The other probability is that it was Cush who was leading the rebellion, and he was leading the rebellion primarily to win back the respect for the lineage of Ham, right? And so he was there to try to do that. And he eventually, of course, they fail, and they all move to North Africa. Cush means black, and it's supposedly that really the Ethiopians, the black race of Africa, comes about as a result of Cush. Something happened to Cush when he was born, and he was black. All right. So, we don't know much about that other than tradition says that Nimrod was black and he was the son of Cush, and Cush was black. And so you get into some interesting stuff. David Roll talks about the patterns of evidence. Tim Mahoney's film talks about this. And by the way, when you line up, which I do in the book, you line up what Tim was trying to say but was afraid to say about the chronology. It actually lines up exactly with what I'm saying, which has to do with the Exodus being around 1620, not 1440, not 1280, which is what the academics say. And the evangelical view is, well, as 1440, and they conquered, Canaan in 1403 and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. I take the position that the Exodus occurred in 1628 at the time of the great volcano at Thera, Santorini, which was probably either the most or second most powerful explosion of a volcano in the history of the world.
Really?
We studied that in ordination class.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
Did you?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a really good chance that happened. And then it also happens to line up Catherine Kenyon, who's an archaeologist, the daughter of the famous Kenneth. What's it? Kathleen. Gosh, I'm getting. Must be time. Must be late. Kenyon. Yes. So
that's our fault, folks. By the way, because we're doing this pretty late.
We're doing this late. Yeah. But anyway, her father was a very famous archaeologist dealing with the Middle East and so forth. But she had done work in the Middle East as well, and she identified the time of a burning of Jericho and the city of Laish and the city of Ai, that these cities that were burned, it looked like they all happened around 1560, 1570, 1580, not 1405 BC. And so you've got an issue that, and Tim Mahoney brings this out in the film, you've got a real problem is that you cannot line up the evidence for when the conquest of Canaan occurs with the Bible's timing on the Exodus, which leads, of course, people to believe that the Exodus really didn't happen. And so that's another fable of the Bible. So, so does chronology matter? Yeah, it really does matter, because it tells the story in a truthful way. So getting back to Nimrod, the other thing that people talk about is, well, the Tower of Babel was about the division of the nations, the divisions of the peoples, and that's what happened, because that's when Peleg was born, and Peleg's name meant divide, to divide. Well, the problem with that is that Peleg wasn't born for almost 450 years after the Tower of Babel. And so that couldn't have been what it meant. And I argue that it's not what it meant. If you go study Peleg and the derivation of the names of Peleg throughout the Middle East, what you learn is that the term divide really was to divide by water or divide by channel, divide by river, or perhaps divide by glaciers melting and waters rising 400 feet worldwide, and the
like
separation
of
drift. It's just like that the continents would have separated because of the rise of the waters, perhaps frozen at the time of the flood. And so I, actually start the second book, Reading the Bible Part 2, talking about the issue of Peleg. And Graham Hancock, by the way, looking at the city of Alexandria, he's doing some skin diving there, and so I talk a bit about that and start the book off with Alexandria and Graham Hancock, which is kind of interesting, I think. But anyway,
fingerprints of the gods, baby.
Yeah, that's right. But anyway, so that it matters, and those are the things that can really can mess up our testimony and our witness to the truthfulness of the Scripture, because we don't understand the history, because it got fouled up with the chronology of the Masoretic text.
I wish that information had been brought up when I was in that ordination class, because that was a deconstructionist, progressive sort of postmodernist ordination class. Of course, we didn't realize that till we were about a year into it.
Right,
And,
right.
We actually talked about that in our interview with Elisa Childers that we will air this upcoming Sunday. And
Okay.
we talked about these things, and because the chronology did not match up with what we have or do not have historical evidence for, it was treated as some sort of inspired, metaphorical, what can we get out of it? We're all in our own wilderness.
Kind of erodes your faith a little bit.
Oh, I watched grown women cry in that class
That's
because their faith was being destroyed.
Yeah.
Well,
so,
it's the
where
whole
were you
issue
10 years ago, Doug?
Yeah,
right here.
I was sitting there moaning and groaning about these same things, going, that can't possibly be true. What does that mean? If the pharaohs were around 3000 BC and Abraham was, 1,000 years later, I mean, how can that possibly be?
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of other things. And of course, I go through and talk about all of those stories and really point out all of the reasons why Nimrod, the death of Nimrod. Oh man, that's a big section of one of the chapters, is just figuring out all the different stories about how Nimrod died and realizing that it was impossible for Esau to have killed Nimrod. All right. Again, you've had these big gaps of time between these different characters. And so the book of Jasher, give it a big raspberry, right? So it just ain't so, man. It just ain't so.
Do we have Stream Deck hooked up?
It's not working.
Oh, we don't have that. We got a bunch of sound effects on the Stream Deck.
All right.
I was gonna hit a horn.
Yep.
So I mean, that's one of the things that is kind of the neo-modern sort of cool take on Nimrod, is that he sort of was trying to resurrect the Nephilim, empire. He became as a Nephilim, a mighty man, which, and then I think it's in Jasher where he wears the skins of skins of Adam and Eve, and and Esau finds him and kills him, and that's why he's so exhausted when he comes back.
Can you imagine how bad those skins would have smelled if those were the skins from Adam and Eve? Because if that was true, and let's say Adam and Eve was 5500 BC, which is when I believe they were especially created by God. Now you're talking about what, 2,500 years. So those skins would have been pretty smelly. They probably literally would have been totally disintegrated. I mean,
I don't think they had that good of a tanner, back then.
No, I don't. Well, God did the work, so we have to give him credit for it, right? Well. So I'm sure that they lasted a good long time, but no, it's, and of course, then we also have, what's his name, Hislop and the two Babylons, and he's way off target, way off target. It's interesting. All this stuff is interesting reading, but it's, ultimately it can't be true. So, but I get in and I talk about that. The walls of Babylon, they weren't, 4 chariots wide, and they weren't 40 miles around. I mean, all of this stuff is mythology that comes typically from the book of Jasher or from Josephus or from some other source, but it can't be true for archaeological reasons and for chronological reasons as well. And my favorite though is the wife of Nimrod. What was the wife of Nimrod?
I forgot. Man, it's
Semiramis, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Semiramis. Well, that's a real problem too, and I talk about why that was, why that's just a big mess as well. So all these things. So I'm kind of a myth buster, like that show,
you
Mythbusters. I'm kind of Mythbusters, but the reality is that, hey, listen, I take the Bible literally when it means to be taken literally, and I do believe in metaphor, and that a lot of the Old Testament was written in poetry, so metaphor is important. But when it's meant to be taken literal, it's meant to be taken literal, and I guarantee you, the story of Adam and Eve, of Cain and Abel, of Noah, of Abraham, those stories are meant to be taken literally.
Yeah.
And the timeline that we have in the chronology of the Septuagint tells us that they can be taken literally. And so anyway, so that's my preaching for this evening.
That's a threat. That's a threat to a lot of
Oh, it is, isn't it?
progressive doctrine,
Yeah.
especially.
Yeah, way to be a real Dougie Downer.
Well, listen, I
Countercultural.
have been attacked by the King James people, as you can imagine. Right?
Oh, I
Sure.
bet.
And so the book I wrote, the biography of the Christian Bible, I wrote that book in between rebooting part 1 and rebooting part 2. And it's specifically dealing with the issues associated with the King James Version and the errors in the King James, the 1611 version, and why it's not the perfect version, and so forth and so on. It's a great version. More people probably have been brought to Christ through the King James Bible than any other Bible.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the 1611 version was perfect, and that the King's English is meant to be more sacred than the original Hebrew or the original Greek, because it's not. But there's a lot of folks that disagree with that. So go ahead.
Yeah. Forgive me for if you may have mentioned this already.
Okay.
What version of the Bible would you recommend?
Okay. Well, ironically, I like the English Standard Version of the of the Masoretic text, combined with I'm going to turn around here and grab a couple of Bibles.
Sure.
All right, so I'll show you a few. This is, let me know if you can read that, an English translation of the Septuagint. This is
nice.
the most scholarly version of the Septuagint. It has great introductions to the books and explains the differences in the books between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text. So it's a great one. Its biggest problem is that the names of the Hebrews and all of the folks are not the names. They're not worded or spelled the way we're used to. And so consequently, it's very confusing.
Gotcha.
So all right. So then the Bible I read out of the Septuagint is, I like my cover. Don't you like my cover?
Very nice.
Is, well, let's see here. I'll just do it this way. It's the Lexham English version of, let's see if I can get that right. The Lexham English version of the Septuagint. This was done in 2019.
Okay.
This is probably the most readable version. It doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles, in terms of the maps, the back, and all that kind of stuff. It's just really the text. But it's very readable and much better than the other versions to read. So anyway, those are the two I recommend. But my favorite version, really, this is the one I read for the Septuagint. And then the other one I like is the English Standard Version, the Archaeology Bible, because the notes at the bottom of the page, if I can get that, sort of right there, the Archaeology Bible, all of the bells and whistles in this are fantastic. Okay. And it does a reasonably good job of pointing out the differences between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text in key passages. Now, it's not going to go so far as to say this was corrupted by the Pharisees, in the year 110 AD, but nevertheless it has fantastic explanations. Lots of pictures of things and great notes at the bottom. So this is a tremendous study Bible. Cool. So you can see kind of like, sort of the introduction and stuff like that. So anyway, so this is, I love this Bible. I think it's a great Bible. So when I have time and when I can be more disciplined, I like to read this Bible side by side with the Septuagint. Why do I like to do that? Man, do you find differences? There are lots of differences, and some of them are surprisingly simple, but they change the meaning. And so, so it's Bible study, good Bible study just never ends. Never ends.
Nick and I are both authors, so we, can spend a lot of time laboring over. I've spent days laboring over one or two words. Which word do you use? Because it can change the meaning of the message that you're trying to convey. So it matters. You know,
Yeah, it does.
really, really matters.
It does. It does. Words
know.
matter.
Words
do.
matter.
Yeah, they do. That's right.
We could boil this whole interview down into like 1 second where Doug just goes, words matter.
Words matter.
That's my title. That's the title for the YouTube video.
Yes. There we go. Nailed it.
Now my other famous truism for writing, which I'll share with you, is there is no such thing as good writing. There is only good rewriting.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Boy, I believe that, especially if you're dealing with theology or science or anything. You can't just whip it out like writing a sermon. You have to really be careful what you say and how you say it. So,
for sure.
Otherwise, you might stumble into strange thoughts like the courts of heaven and some other weirdnesses. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, I've got like 4 questions.
Okay.
And I don't even know if we have time for all of these. Well,
we're looking at an hour. We're looking at an hour 6, according to what I'm seeing on the screen.
Man, I don't want to. I'm okay. I'm going to skip a couple of these.
That's fine. I'm happy to. We can go to the full hour and a half. That's fine.
Nice. We appreciate that.
I'll skip this one too. Real quickly, you talk about in Revelation, there's 3 different Babylons mentioned. I know you've talked about that, but could you? Because I've loved studying Revelation. I always assumed it was just one Babylon.
Right. Well, and this is one of my own heresies. Okay. I wrote a book recently. Let's see. This is called "Will Babylon Be Rebuilt in the Last Days?" Okay. And this is a response to Andy Woods. Andy Woods believes, as does a number of other folks, even Chuck Missler and so forth, that the ancient city on the Euphrates will be rebuilt and will become the center of the power base for the Antichrist. Well, I think it could be rebuilt as it's a tourist attraction right now, a very bad one. But it could be rebuilt, but I don't ever see it being the center of commerce, political power, et cetera, et cetera. I don't see that as a possibility. So, but the answer, listen, I'm a dispensationalist, so I got to show you that I have a chart as well here. May not be able to see it too well, but just so you know, it's in the book. And this is where I talk about the 3 Babylons and what happens and when they happen and all that. And the long story short is I believe there are 3 Babylons. I think the United States is one of the 3 and participates in the 3rd. The first one is the daughter of Babylon, Jeremiah 50:51. It's very difficult to work those verses into the other 2 Babylons. They sort of stand alone. And so I believe that occurs. There is a destruction of Babylon, which is the United States, and I'm predicting, or have predicted, that it will be destroyed. Possibly, I'm still a pre-tribber. It will be destroyed, perhaps right at the time of the tribulation, the beginning of the maybe a 10-year period of tribulation, which Daniel's last 7 years start about 3 years later. So the daughter of Babylon is America. I believe it will be destroyed in judgment before the 7 years of Daniel begin. Right. And I happen to know that there's about 6 or 7 other people like Grant Jeffries and Chuck Missler and a bunch of others that agree with what I just said. So they can't answer for themselves because they've gone to be with the Lord. But nevertheless, that is the case. The second Babylon is the Mystery Babylon of Revelation 17. And Mystery Babylon, I happen to believe, is a religious Babylon, not a political, geopolitical reality, but a religious belief, religious Babylon. And I think it is certainly easily identifiable with the Catholic Church, all the mess that goes on at the Vatican and so forth. But I don't think it is purely a Catholic problem. I think that even in the good old charismatic churches and the Baptist Church, I did say it, didn't I? That even in these churches, there are unbelievers, and there are people that participate in Mystery Babylon.
Yeah.
All right. And so I tend to believe that is the case. And lastly is Babylon the Great. Now, why would I say Babylon the Great is actually alive and well throughout that whole period of time, the 7 years? and ultimately it is destroyed when Jesus returns. But now, why are there 3 Babylons? All right, it turns out that there are, each of those Babylons is destroyed by a different power. All right, and so let me just run through that. So the daughter of Babylon is destroyed by an alliance of nations from the north. So it could be Russia, China, North Korea. When they fire missiles, they're going to fire them over the North Pole. All right, and so it is destroyed in what appears to be a nuclear war, and that is its destruction. The destruction of Mystery Babylon, it's destroyed by the Antichrist and his 10 kings. So that's very different than the daughter of Babylon and its destruction. And so it is destroyed by the Antichrist and the 10 kings, probably after the Antichrist has identified himself as the Antichrist. And I believe still in the temple in some manner. He will disclose that and so forth. So the Antichrist does the destroying of Babylon, and that Babylon is the religious Babylon. The third Babylon is Babylon the Great, and it's destroyed at the end of the tribulation, the end of the 7-year period of Daniel. And its destroyer is none other than Jesus Christ. All right. Jesus Christ comes back and he destroys Babylon the Great. And this is where we finally see the words hallelujah, hallelujah said in the Bible when Babylon the Great is destroyed. And so you have, in each case, you have a different time frame for when these Babylons are destroyed. You have a different means for their destruction, how they are destroyed, and you have a different power that destroys them. And so that's why I have come to the conclude there are, in the end days, there are 3 Babylons. And that's why there are 3 Babylons. That's really the whole counsel of God, the scripture, would suggest that is the case. And so I know Andy Woods wouldn't agree with me, but he's a great teacher. He's a great teacher. So, but in this, I think he's incorrect. So,
well, if everybody agreed with everybody, would there be left to talk about?
Wouldn't be any fun. Would not be any fun.
Honestly,
so, But Andy Woods, if you're listening, I really like your book on the rapture. Just so you know. All right.
That's honestly a bit of back of house. That was one of the things we were really excited about with having you on, Doug. Was you have an opinion that is well informed, well researched, and different from just about everybody else's when it comes to a handful of topics.
And
that's true. That's true.
Yeah, and
gets me in trouble. Sometimes.
Good for you.
Not here.
Yeah,
not here. It does.
I appreciate that.
As one fellow rebel to another, good for you.
Yes.
But no, that's one thing we appreciate because we have been accused in the past of like only having people on who believe this or that, and it's like like, dude, that's not kind of how it happens. We just like reach out to people we like, that we think are cool.
Yeah.
Everybody, whether it's you, Gary Wayne, Derek Gilbert, Ryan Pitterson, Vicky Joy Anderson, guaranteed, Gabriel Bello, every single person that we've interviewed will have a different opinion somewhere. Yeah. But everybody gets along.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
absolutely. Oh yeah. No question about it. So yeah, I like diversity. And
fun.
I don't like adversity, but I like diversity.
Yeah.
Spoken like a true writer.
Yeah. It makes it more fun.
It does.
Yeah.
You want to go?
I had,
go for it. Do your question first.
I know. I had one that I really, really wanted us to get to, but while we still had time, because I know we only got like about 10, 15 minutes. Tower of Babel. You have also spoken about CERN before.
Right.
And I wanted to ask you briefly, do you think that there is a mirror between those two? And then as a corollary to that, what are your thoughts on AI and its possible involvement with that?
Well, in general, AI is involved in any sophisticated computer system today, and has been for quite some time. The issue of quantum computing is perhaps kind of a different issue, and quantum computing is certainly at the heart of CERN, and and it's a very different type of computer, and there's a lot of mythology that's been developed around CERN and quantum computing and the religions at CERN and all that, so forth and so on. But anyway, AI, I happen to believe AI is going to be hugely important. I don't know that the Lord will tarry so long that AI will, like the Terminator, like Skylab, will take over, right? I don't think that that's the Antichrist, but clearly, the AI is going to be hugely impactful, and a lot of people are going to lose their jobs because of AI in the future.
Yeah.
So that is really a destructive aspect of it. So there's real concerns, and unfortunately, the representative government we have isn't smart enough, and they don't have the political will to try to understand these things and lead us through the maze to try to, resolve these things before they become horrible problems that we have to deal with. So that's kind of what I think about, AI. It's going to be super important, and it's already becoming really important.
You disappoint me greatly, Doug. I have so many guns and so much ammo. I was really looking forward to shooting some Terminators. Like, I know they're going to get me with
you
nanobots.
you can still shoot the aliens, though.
I still shoot
they're,
the
they're
aliens,
demons you can shoot.
But don't worry, I will be back.
Yes,
I'll be back.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'll be back with my aliens.
I think I need a vacation.
I think I said that quote to somebody last week at work, and they looked at me like they had no idea.
I like Terminator 2, one of my favorite movies, certainly. So okay, so going back to CERN, CERN is the Tower of Babel. I did a video with Anthony Patch on CERN that, gosh, we sold a bunch of copies of that. And you can see sort of truncated versions of it out on the internet. Anthony Patch and Doug Woodward, and so we talked a lot about that, and I think that what we discussed is really quite true. I don't know that CERN really sits on top of the bottomless pit, which is a view that Anthony held. I do think that CERN is a pit. I think that it's a real it's doing some really wicked things. Based upon the book I'm working on now, I think the Higgs boson is a bunch of malarkey, and I the God particle ain't the God. It ain't God.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the case. I think that it's a horrible way to spend billions of dollars to build a big circle in the ground, 200 feet below the ground.
Dude, no kidding.
And to try to split the atom 18 ways to Sunday, which it's done. The idea that you're going to continue to understand the atom by continuing to split it into little tiny particles, I don't think you're going to get any mileage out of that ultimately. But that's just my non-astrophysicist, point of view. The issue of quantum reality, which is related to CERN, of course, that's a pretty important thing. Our understanding of quantum reality, the nature of the way the atom is structured, all that's pretty important. But I think CERN does represent a focal point for pagan religions in Europe. I think you saw that with the tunnel. I'm trying to remember the name of the tunnel. It wasn't the Carlisle Tunnel, but it was something like that.
I don't remember the name, but I remember the opening ceremony.
Oh yeah, the ceremonies. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And of course, that's right by CERN where that occurred, just a few miles away. And so you've got pagan religions that are very involved. And now the one that's the most fascinating that we talked about at length is the relationship of Saturn to CERN.
Yep.
And so we go into that mythology around Saturn to a great deal. The
Do
rings of
you-
Saturn and so forth, and the rings of the people that encircle the Kabbalah at in Mecca. Those rings turn the same way.
Have you so okay, you're touching on like you're scratching another little pet itch of mine here. Are
Okay.
you referring to like the cult of Saturnalia, the black cube,
The black
when you-
cube, yep, Saturnalia,
and then like the
all of that.
there's the star, the eye of the storm, I think on the pole of Saturn that has that same
Yeah,
shape
there's
as the
the
three-dimensional shape in the Star of Remphan.
yeah. I mean, you can see that it's a hexagon.
That's what it is. Yeah.
I actually do believe that hexagon is in fact created naturally, not supernaturally.
Okay.
And so and that's based upon it can be reproduced, I'm told, in a lab, by the folks that do the electric universe and all that stuff. So
Oh wow.
it's an electrical reality of what's going on Saturn and Jupiter. They're super powerful electrical magnetic storms and so forth that are going on there. So that's true. The other pole of Saturn, of course, has the spiral, and that spiral really is like an aurora borealis, I believe. And once again, you have really powerful electromagnetic realities going on there. You have plasma, in the atmosphere creating, in effect, auroras, just like plasma or ions create the auroras on Earth for electromagnetic reasons. So you got that going on. I think that Saturn as a focal point for the cult of Saturn, I think it's absolutely the case that is a big deal. And I think the cult of the black cube is a myth, I think, built around the cult of Saturn. I find it curious and fascinating that you see these black cubes, in so many different places in movies and and all that. The assimilation. Here are the Borg. The Borg spaceship is a cube. We will assimilate you. So
Resistance is futile.
yeah, it's right. So that's where I'm coming from, and we did. I'd encourage folks to. You can get the CERN DVD from Prophecy Watchers, and you could probably get a special, a combination of, and you can get it from me as well, by the way, at my website, CERN and the book Revising Reality, Volume 1. And so that is that's a pretty fascinating read. People really get a kick out of that book because we cover so many issues. And, essentially the thesis is pretty simple. If you really understand biblical cosmology, it blows the lid off of the cosmology developed by Carl Sagan and the astrophysicists of today.
Awesome.
And so so it's, if you haven't read it, I'd encourage you to read it. It's a book that you'll have a lot of fun with.
I kind of look at a lot of these modern scientists, astrophysicists, especially the pop culture charismatic ones, as being like modern day magi. Like they're kind of spinning a cult.
Right.
There is a wizardry kind of aspect, especially with their charisma and just what one of our friends calls demon math, in astrology or so.
Right. Yeah. I heard some guys talking today about the courts of heaven, and that seems to be a topic of current consternation. And I heard about this 5 or 6 years ago, and I thought it was ridiculous. But but anyway, to your point, there's a lot of charismatic hubbub around this whole thing right now, and it's like people are always searching for the new thing, the new flavor of the month, right? And it's, man, the old time religion is good enough for me. I think you've got to get back to the basics. Read a book like Hannah Whitlaw Smith's the Christian. I think it wasn't called the. It's not the Christian life, but it's really about how to live the Christian life. And but some of these old books by the masters, let's see, was it the guy that wrote the book about holiness of God, A.W. Tozer.
Tozer,
yeah, read those books, man.
Yeah,
that's just they chill they give you chills. And,
and a lot of people
yeah.
they don't realize that a lot of this stuff is not really that new. I mean, you know, when I started writing the Heavenly Realms novels, my dad gave me, or our dad gave me, a copy of Clarence Larkin's The Spirit World, which was written in 1922,
probably.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
This is not. A lot of this stuff is all that is new is simply that which has been forgotten.
Yeah,
there's nothing new under the sun.
That's right.
Samson, or not Samson, Solomon. Solomon was right.
Yeah.
There's nothing new under the sun.
That's right.
So but anyway, I get very disgusted with what I see, and boy, you have to keep your eyes on Jesus, because if you put your eyes on any human, you're going to be disappointed.
Yep.
And you got to put your eyes on Jesus.
Yeah, and that's more than enough. That'll keep you busy for the rest
It
of your
is.
life.
It is. Yeah,
For
absolutely.
sure.
Yeah.
Especially when you have to give stuff up.
All right. Well, do we have one more question before I fall asleep?
Man, I just wanted to ask you about the sequel to Revising Reality.
Yeah.
Volume 2.
Yeah. Okay. I'm 100 pages in.
Nice.
And I've been working very carefully through each of the chapters, and I'm attempting to explain. I have to go through and explain some of the basics about astrophysics, and I have to kind of start off and talk about Kepler and the laws of motion and the way the planets work, and then I get into relativity and explain what relativity really is, why relativity was created in the first place, and it was because of a mistaken interpretation of an experiment that occurred in 1887, and was continually botched up by most everybody except a few guys that got it right. And what Einstein argued is not true. There's other explanations for why things happen the way they do. Einstein always said that speed, that the light speed is the same in all directions at the same time. So no matter whether it's like if you're in a car and you throw a baseball at somebody while the car is going 80 miles an hour, that baseball is going to be 80 miles an hour plus the speed of how you throw the ball. So you throw the ball at 90 miles an hour, that ball is going to be at 170 when it hits you, right? And so, but Einstein would say, if that's light, traveling down the highway, that light is going to go, at 186,000 miles per second towards you and 186,000 miles per second away from you. It's always the same. It's a constant, right? And that's the kind of the core idea. And he also said one of the corollaries is that there's a vacuum in space, and there's nothing that can slow light down. There's no ether. There's no this sort of stuff that was discussed about whether there was an ether. In effect, it's a substance in space that propagates light waves, just like air propagates sound waves. And seawater, is able to propagate waves on the ocean. And so, any type of wave has to have a means to propagate it. It doesn't work in a vacuum. And so there are those that would say that it does, but the reality is that there is some substance there. The ether does exist. So part of it is to talk about that. But I'm going to get into 0-point energy, discuss the electric universe. If you guys are familiar with the Thunderbolts Project at all, the Cosmos. Okay, Thunderbolts Project. You want to begin to get familiar with some of the electric universe stuff, because that is very much. Missler got into this just at towards the end of his ministry, and he was very enthusiastic about the electric universe concepts. It's not gravity that really shapes the universe. It's electromagnetism. And so that's really a key factor. So the bottom line is that astrophysics, astronomy, the way it's taught, it's wrong. It's all wrong. And when you understand it, it's really exciting stuff. So anyway, so I'm doing what is a very difficult thing. I'm taking these really hard subjects and trying to simplify them and explain them in such a way the person can go, I get it. I understand why light can't be a constant,
Yeah.
or and so forth. And so anyway, so that's what I'm trying to do. So that really is a book on here's Christian cosmology, and here's why a Christian's cosmology is shaped the way that it is.
That's cool.
And so, so that's what I'm trying to do. We'll see if I succeed. It's going to be tough.
Do you think it'll turn you into a flat earther, Doug?
No.
Why did I think that was going to be the answer? Yep.
No. I loved Rob Skiba. He was a good friend, but that is a problem. It's more intriguing to talk about whether or not we are an emotionless Earth and the whole universe revolves around us, which is the argument, of the Earth being at the center of the universe, and geocentrism. And that's bubbled up in a lot of the work that, if you go to the website, Galileo Was Wrong, that's all about, the guys that are doing that work. A guy named Robert Sungenis, I think is what his name is, this massive book, which I've studied. And there's real strong arguments. The point that Einstein said is that, basically, you're right. We can't prove that the world is even in motion. The world could be sitting still. And because of the way that these experiments work, we can't prove it moves. However, blah, 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 blah. So I think the Earth does move, but, which is, anathema to these guys that, talk about the geocentrism, the revision of geocentrism. It's very Catholic, that's where they're coming from. And I congratulate them on some tremendous work, but I, at the end of the day, there is an ether and it blows at about 36,000 miles an hour at all times, and it's blowing us towards Vega, I think it is. So, and so there's a speed of the Earth moving through this solar system and a speed of the solar system moving through the galaxy and so forth and so on. And so once you understand all these things, it's kind of like, wow, it's pretty cool cosmos we're in.
Yeah, it is cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
No matter what it is, it's pretty
fascinating. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, Doug, you've been an awesome guest. We've really enjoyed talking with you.
Oh,
scholar.
thank you.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun, and
I appreciate
I hope
that.
we can bring you back sometime and talk more, because there are still
Absolutely.
questions that now I got the itch on some things,
Yeah.
and I definitely want to ask you some things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna put your book up on the screen, or just the second rebooting the
Yeah.
Bible.
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw
That's
this
fine.
up here real quick so people can see what it looks like. That QR code just takes people to Amazon, but where else can people find you and your work?
Right. Well, you can certainly come to my website. My website is faithhappens.com, and I have a store. All of my books are there, and my videos. I have several videos. I have a new video which I'll show you. You guys might find interesting. Let's see if I get it. You read that?
Yes, I saw that.
Evil in the CIA.
Uh-oh.
So this one will get me killed. So
I got plenty of bunkers to hide you.
yeah. So if you hear of me committing suicide sometime in the near future,
you didn't get Clinton.
Don't believe it. Yeah, Arkansas. No, it's Arkansas. Arkansas.
2 to the back of the head, ruled as a
That's
suicide.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I never figured out how you could do that with a shotgun, especially. But anyway, and so you can find them at my website again, faith-happens.com. And then Prophecy Watchers has a lot of my books.
Cool.
And they have some packages. I do some bundles on my website, and that's something that Amazon doesn't do.
Right.
So I'll package a DVD and a book or 2 books and so forth. And so I'm selling the Rebuilding the Bible books for $25 a piece, but I offer them for like $45 for a set. And then the new DVD I did, which is a 2-hour DVD that walks you through all the salient points of the two books, can be bought. It's called the Septuagint Controversy, and it's out there as well. So people may want to read that, or may want to watch that.
Awesome.
Especially if you don't want to read 800 pages, right?
But you know what? When the grid goes down, the paperback's going to be a nice thing to have.
It is.
right.
That's right. That's right. So,
Doug
anyway.
Woodward, you are a scholar and a gentleman in the truest sense of the word.
Well,
we have
thank
had
you.
an amazing time. We've been keeping an eye on the chat as well, and they have really thoroughly enjoyed it. So
fantastic.
we're
Fantastic.
extremely blessed.
And I think
Well-
Doug has struck down the darkness today.
I think so.
I think
Struck
that he has
down.
struck down the darkness.
Hey, that is good news.
Yeah.
That's good news. Well, it's probably these lights that I bought. Derek Gilbert told me where to get some really great lights, and so
Yeah, those are cool. That looks good.
yeah,
Does
that
look
looks
yeah,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, all right, guys, thank you a lot. I've had a lot of fun. I appreciate it much.
Great
Thank
talking with you, man.
Doug. Have a good rest of your night. Get some
All right.
sleep, sir.
All right, thank you. Good night.
See
right.
you, buddy. Bye.
Bye.
There you go, everyone.
Man, wasn't Doug great?
It was awesome.
Doug Woodward, awesome.
Man. And a real gentleman to do this at 8:00 at night.
Yeah.
Our
That's when
time.
we started. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember.
Class is dismissed.
Yeah, class is dismissed. I know. I got a whole
Ton of notes.
page
Look at
of
this.
notes. Yeah, I can't wait to. My phone died about 10 minutes in, so I hope nobody was trying to message me. But I can't wait to take a picture of this and put it on the Patreon. I always post our notes from our interviews, or my notes, on the Patreon as like a little preview, like a little heads up for people.
Yeah.
When we do the recorded ones. But this was a lot of fun, man. And Doug was so cool, and everything he mentions gives you so much to talk about and think about. And it's just, it's like you think you've reached the end of the rabbit hole, and like, dude, you haven't, you haven't touched on anything yet, And his website's great, faithhappens.com. It's faith hyphen happens.com.
Yep.
Definitely worth checking out, because he's got a ton of stuff on there, and he has a blog with articles where he updates things. I think that's how I found out about his CERN video. So yeah, and Prophecy Watchers as well. And then I think he has his own YouTube channel, if I remember correctly. So there's a lot of different ways to find Doug, and highly recommend you doing a deeper dive. This was kind of a surface level 30,000
I can't wait to go back and watch this video.
Yeah, I know, this is going to be a fun one. And
I
you
might
guys
have to get one of those Bibles that he was recommending.
Oh, I wrote down
Those-
every one.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Septuagint. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I'm so in on going to like an Orthodox church now,
You should do it, man.
because I just look, it appeals to my latent crusader is what I'm saying.
Dude, they'd
You know?
welcome you with open arms.
Right, I got the beard.
Yeah.
I got the Templar surcoat somewhere in the house. Can I wear that? Is that cool?
Maybe leave that at home.
Leave that at home.
Yeah.
What about my Jedi robe? Can I wear that?
You can wear that.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Just leave your lightsabers.
I got a hand and a half sword. That'll work. Yeah, but no, I mean, like, honestly, it was cool. It was cool having Doug talk about Orthodox, and how they adhere to the Septuagint, because like I really have genuinely been considering, like, I gotta find a church,
Yeah.
but I have to find something that's different, because I've
Yeah.
been going to churches all my life, and
Yeah.
it just bores me to tears. So
100%. I totally understand.
it's a life, man. It's how it goes. We want to thank everybody for being in the chat.
Yeah.
Gabriel Bello is there. He's going to go live pretty soon here. So you guys want to check out Gabriel Bello Music here on YouTube, and check out his stuff, because he is awesome, and he's a dear friend of the channel. He's helped us out a ton. Cactus Kicker, Chris Caps, Trinial. You're kind of a new one here tonight, Trinial, but
Yeah.
we really appreciate you jumping in on the chat. Al Ferry, Gary Galuska. Let's see. We had some other people in here too that were really cool.
Pete dropped by from Creepy Little
Pete.
Book.
Yeah, that's
Pete
right.
was here.
I was so excited.
Yeah.
It took everything I had, Pete, not to give you a shout out and interrupt poor Doug.
Kenneth Rank was on tonight.
Yeah.
Thanks for-
By the way, Pete is the proprietor of Creepy Little Book, which is another fabulous YouTube channel. If you enjoy any of the weird stuff that we talk about here, you have got to check out Creepy Little Book.
We also had Kenneth Noel Curran.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody here. I want to give everyone a shout out just as a thank you on a Thursday
Dento
night.
Bean.
Oh, Dento Bean was on. That's
Good to
right.
see you here again.
And just scrolling through the chat here, making sure I didn't miss any names.
Mhm.
You notice it was all
End of
guys.
the earth?
It was all guys tonight.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
guys night,
Guys' night, bro
Yeah.
night.
bro night.
Yep.
Yeah. Gary, you said Gary Galuska.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Had a lot of fun. Hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Let's do our tail end obligatories real quick.
Oh yes.
If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, I just want to one last time say,
Yep.
hey, hit that subscribe button and the bell. It actually works.
Yeah.
It worked tonight anyway.
Yeah.
We greatly appreciate it. And if you've already done that, just hit the like button.
Yeah.
That would really help tremendously. We'd really appreciate that. And we did
Deep
our
in that digital
sponsors.
footprint, baby.
Yeah.
Strike that bell. Hit it like it owes you money. Treat it like liberty. Crack that bell.
Crack that bell.
You know.
And real quick, I'm going to give a shout out to our patrons,
Yes.
starting with our prestigious
Yeah.
Pressfield level patron, Lisa S.
Yeah.
Appreciate the sponsorship. Hemingway level patrons, Jody S.
Yeah.
American Cars.
American Cars actually recommended Doug to us, so
Okay.
want to give a special shout out
Nice.
to American Cars for putting this on our radar. So thank
Very
you.
cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then we have an army of Orwell level patrons.
Yeah, we do.
These are the ministers of the broken sword right here.
That's
folks.
right.
We got
Yep.
Charmaine W, Jerry S, Marsha B. We got Joe, Cheryl, Chris Caps,
Yeah.
Karen B, Canine Training, Mama
Yeah.
Shaw, Cascadian Breeze, Gabe Bello,
Yeah.
Christy D, Mike Fisher, Carol J, Jamie J, Sean E, Sunny, Michelle, Charlotte.
Yeah.
You guys are the foundation.
Thank
and
you.
Thanks for making this happen for us and
Yes.
helping us keep this thing going. So
And if you would like to join the Patreon,
that one's boring. Let me put up the other
you want to
thing.
do put up the QR code?
Yeah, let's put the other thing up. It looks
Yeah.
cool.
Second from the top and straight on till morning.
Let's do this one.
You want that one instead?
I like this
the
one.
nice looking one.
Shabam.
There you go. So yeah, hit the QR code and you can check out the different tiers that we have available for our Patreon. Everything from just guest list. You want to see who we have? We've already started booking for June. Started doing that today. And then all the way up to discounts on merch, free merchandise, a shout out, guaranteed questions to any of our guests, and then we have a couple of upper tier
Exclusive
ones.
content from
A
our
lot,
interviews.
yeah, exclusive content from
Yeah.
any of our recorded interviews, behind the scenes content, digital downloads.
We just threw the whole thing at it.
Yeah, free books, signed copies of Nick's either Travelers League series or Henry Half Moon, signed copies of my Heavenly Realm series.
Foot rubs.
Yeah, foot rubs. Yep. Nick will come to your house and
I feel-
serenade you.
Well,
You know, I don't know, mow your lawn. You know, you don't want me mowing your lawn. Terrible. I'm just gonna set it on fire. You know, like what? This is mowing it,
you'd
isn't
actually, if you just burned my lawn so I never had to mow it again,
Dude,
you
I-
would be doing me an enormous favor.
it? My grandfather, granddaddy, like hated mowing the lawn, and he always wanted to like just pave it. And like
Oh, that'd be great.
being in the job I'm in, I'm always just like, I get it, granddaddy. You were right
Yep.
about everything.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
Well, guys, this has been fun tonight. We're going to let you go. We really appreciate you guys jumping on and watching tonight, and hope it was a nice surprise for you.
Yeah.
We've been looking forward to talking to Doug for a long time, and look forward to getting him back.
Yeah. I'd love to get Doug back. He's awesome. And we'll hopefully, by the time he comes back, his second volume of Revising Reality will be out, and we could talk about that. But we got a bunch of other stuff that we could talk about with Doug too, that we kind of hinted at a little bit before we got started here tonight. So it'll be really fun. And then come back Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
Around 6 p.m. Central Time, when we will air the interview.
With Elisa.
That's right, Elisa Childers.
Yep.
Yes. Author of Live Your Truth and Other Lies of the Progressive Church.
Yeah.
So
It's going to be great. We'll see you guys Sunday, 6 o'clock Central.
that's right. All right. Until then, everyone have a great rest of your week. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Nick,
We are the Gosslings. Go forth.
and strike down the darkness.